How's it going, everybody? It's Blake here from the Team MST Negates, bringing you guys a bit of a combo tutorial. I had someone in the comment section yesterday ask me, well, what do you normally do? What do your combos normally look like when you're playing Phantom Knight? And so I'm just going to do a couple examples of what is typical for me to do when I'm playing the deck, starting with both of our starters, mainly being the Tour Guide and Torn Scales. These are the two best starters in the deck. So I'll just start off with Torn Scales. It doesn't really matter what you have in hand, and this is just for a scenario of your opponent not opening any hand traps. So you're going to start with 5 cards in hand, so you can normal your Torn Scales. You can use its effect to send a card from your hand to the grave. Hopefully you would have some sort of a Phantom Knight monster in hand, but for this example, I'm going to say I don't have one. I'll just say that I had an Edge Imp Sabers and send that to grave. Now I can look at the field and say, okay, well, what do I need to send to deck, from deck to grave, to actually optimize on this play? And so if I have no extenders in my hand, so if I don't have like a Kagamucha or one of the Psychic Wielders, one of the Dangers, anything like that, the best play you can do would be to send a copy of your Cloak, because then you can say, okay, well, I have a Cloak in grave. I'm going to go ahead and banish my copy of Cloak to use its effect to add a copy of your Silent Boots. Now Silent Boots says that if you control a Phantom Knight monster, boom, he's a free body on board. And so that's going to start off your play, because your main goal is to start off with at least 2 level 3 monsters on field, because that's what really gets your plays going. So you now have these 2 on field. You can link these 2 away for your copy of Cherubini. You can use Cherubini's effect, which lets you dump one, and it gains a little bit of attack, so that effect is not really that relevant. It's mainly the dumping that you care about. And so, again, this depends on what you have in your hand. If you have your copy of Graph in hand, you're going to want to end up dumping Libic, because Libic will special Graph from hand. But if you don't have any Burning Abyss monsters in hand, you can send your copy of Graph. And then Graph, when it goes to grave, says, okay, we'll special one from deck. And so from there, you're going to want to special your copy of Seer. And Seer, again, doesn't do anything currently, but now you have 2 bodies on board, a link to and a just regular monster, so you can link these 2 away for your copy of Rusty. And since Seer has been moved to the graveyard, you can bring back your copy of Cherubini and special it back to your field with Seer's effect. So now you're going to end up with a Rusty and at least a Cherubini. And so from now we can say, let's go ahead and activate our Rusty effect. And you can look at your grave and see what you need to actually send to continue your play. So we have a Torn Scale and we have a Silent Boots in grave. And we've already activated a Cloak. So at this point, I would probably send a copy of Ragged Gloves to grave, just because that can get you a Fog Blade in grave, which can let you special and extend further. So we send that, and that lets us get a copy of Fog Blade and set that face down on our field. We can either do that, or if we want another extender, we can always go for the Shade Brigadine. But I like playing it more of a control-based when I go first, just so I know I have some form of interruption, as long as I don't have a way to bounce that said interruption back to my hand. From here, you can, let's just go, yeah, I'm trying to think, there's multiple things we could do. So we can go ahead and just banish our copy of Gloves to send a copy of Fogblade to the grave. So now we have a Fogblade in our grave, and we did banish a monster, so we now can activate Torn Scales effect to summon itself back to the field, since we banished a Phantom Knight monster. We then can banish a copy of Fogblade to special back our Boots that we had just used previously, with its own effect, excuse me. So then we can overlay these 2, and this is just me extending a bit more than I probably should. And this is where things can get situational. Typically, I like to go into Levier, just because it's relatively safe. You can detach a material, which lets you keep your Torn Scales in grave. So I can detach material to special summon one of your banished back. And so typically I'm going to special back the Cloak, just because Cloak gets you whatever you need come the following turn. And from here, if you again have no more extenders, the typical thing you would want to do, in this case, since I have not used Boots Effect Engrave, would be link these two away for your copy of Verte Anaconda. Ooh, get that build a little bit better on screen. So you want to link into Verte Anaconda. You can also use Boots Effect Engrave to banish itself, to add you another copy of Fogblade, and that will be in your hand, but I'm going to go ahead and set it for purposes of the video. And then you can use your Verte's effect, sending your copy of Red Eyes Fusion along with your Red Eyes and Dark Magician to the graveyard, and that specials you out your Dragoon. Tip for future usage to anyone: I highly recommend putting Dragoon. I highly recommend putting Dragoon in the far right column, specifically for the purpose of Geonade Resonator, or whatever it is. It's a new card out of Phantom Rage as a common link too that just says swap cards between you and your opponent at zones this card points to. And to keep it from ever being pointed to, the far right column is going to be where you want to summon it, purely so you don't get it stolen by Anima or by the Geonade card, Transverse or something like that. I don't remember the full name. But either way, you're still going to end up with 3 or 4 cards in hand if you didn't use any other extender. A Dragoon Negate plus 2 Fogblade. So it's not the worst board, but it's also probably not the strongest board you can end on. Again, that's just bare bones, as if there were no extenders at all. So I'm going to get everything back in order. So this combo, I'm going to start off with us having both Tour Guide and Kagamucha Knight. You don't have to have the Kagamucha Knight to do this. This just acts as an extra extender. This is why I like Kagamucha Knight. I know I've seen builds where people cut it, and I personally don't agree with that. I think it's too strong not to cut, or not to play, excuse me. So what you do is, again, if you have these 2 in your hand, you're still going to have 3 other cards. So normal summon your Tour Guide. Tour Guide's effect will activate, and then you get to chain Kagamucha Knight to special itself. Since it's not a you can activate, it's when you summon, activate this effect. It chains blocks your Tour Guide, so unless they have an Imperm or an effect failure, they can't stop Tour Guide's effect from resolving. And so here you can do one of 2 things. If you have your Red Eyes Fusion in hand, if you hard drew it, you're going to want to end up summoning your Edge Jump Sabers. If you didn't hard draw it, you're going to want to go ahead and summon your Burning Abyss Engine, which would start with your Graph. So now you already have 3 bodies on board, and you're starting your engine already. So from here, I'll link 2 away like I did last time for Chair Beanie. Chair Beanie's effect will then activate, which lets me dump 1 level 3 monster to grave to gain some attack. And so again, depending on what your hand looks like, will depend on what you want to do. Typically, I'll dump Torn Scales, just because I like having this engraved because it's a free body. So you can dump Torn Scales. Then from there, since you linked, or excuse me, before you actually do the Torn Scales, since you linked Graph away, you get a special one. Same thing, if you have Seer in hand, or if you need to get Seer out of hand, you can summon Libic, but otherwise, summon Seer out of deck from Graph. You can then link these 2 away like we did last time. For our copy of Rusty, and then Seer will bring back our Chair Beanie from grave. Then we can use Rusty's effect, letting us dump 1 to set 1. So again, depending on what your hand looks like, you can dump either Cloak or Boots. Typically I'm going to go Cloak, just so I can say I add Boots in case I don't already have it at some point. And then that's going to get you your Fogblade and set that face down. So now we can activate the effect of Cloak Engrave. So banish our Cloak to add ourselves a copy of Boots to hand. And since we banished a monster, Torn Scales will summon itself back out. So we have our Boots in hand, Torn Scales on field. And so here's where we can do a bit more extending if we wanted to. So we still have at least 3 cards in hand. So we could activate Torn Scales effect since we have not used it this turn. and I'll say, well, let's just dump a copy of Sabers or something, just another extender if we need to. And that will let us send a copy of our gloves to Grave. So gloves is now an available resource in Grave if we need it. Now from here, again, I like to extend a little bit further than I probably should, but I will overlay those two, the tour guide and the torn scales, for my Levier. Then we can use Levier's effect to detach our torn scales, keep that in Grave, to bring back our copy of Cloak. Then we have Boots in hand. We still have not used its effect. We can special Boots out if we wanted to. Then we can overlay Boots and Cloak. And again, this is all personal preference on what you want to do at this point. Yeah, so this isn't going to be as strong in my opinion, just because of what I'm going to do. But I'll give us a Gossip Shadow, just because this lets you turn a monster's effect into each player draws a card, so it can definitely come up. And then you can do your Chair Beanie and Levier for your copy of Verte Anaconda. Use Verte's effect, send your Red Eyes Fusion, your copy of Red Eyes Dark Magician, and that will also bring out your Dragoon. And again, that's just kind of a very, again, put this in the far right column. Always recommend that. And this is just a kind of very basic combo tutorial if you don't already have extenders in hand. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video for the time being and reset everything, shuffle the deck, and we'll do a test hand, just see what combo we can end up with a randomly generated hand. Alrighty, and welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and shuffle this up a little bit. I just did a hard shuffle and now I'm just doing regular shuffles. Again, we're going to just assume we have one die roll. This is the first game we've played, and so I will like to go first. So naturally I'm going to cut the deck, say good luck to the opponent, and we can draw our hand. So we have Torn Scales, Drawn Lockbird, Psychic Wielder, Called by the Grave, and last card is Shade Brigandine. So not the worst hand. I mean, we have Called by, so if they use a hand trap that's a monster, that's great. So we did open one of our combo starters, so normal summon Torn Scales. We can then attempt to activate the effect, or if we want to play safe, since it's not a when you summon, you just can activate it once per turn, we can also summon our Wielder, just so that it does give us another body on board, if we need it. We can then use Torn Scales. In this case, we can either get rid of Droll or Shade Brigandine. Since I'm cutting Droll out the main deck, whenever more cards come in, I'm just going to go ahead and say we send the Droll from deck to Grave. And that will allow us to send, I'll send a copy of our Cloak from deck to Grave. Again, this is assuming we do not get hand trapped in any means. And even if we do, again, we have the Called by, so depending on what the hand trap it is. So we can link two away, since they're both level 3, for a copy of Chair Beanie. We can then use Chair Beanie's effect. And since we didn't start with any of our Burning Abyss monsters, we can send our copy of Graph to boost its attack. And then we can use Graph to summon out Seer. There we go, our copy of Seer. We then can link these two away for our copy of Rusty. And then our Seer and Grave will bring back our Chair Beanie, just as more link fodder at some point in time. We can then use Rusty's effect. So we already have a Cloak and a Torn Scales and Grave. So at this point, again, you can either send Gloves, or I personally will go ahead and send probably Silent Boots, just in case I accidentally mess up again. Nah, I take that back. I'll go ahead and send a copy of Ragged Gloves, just because Cloak can get us back, or we can get Boots off of Cloak. So we then get our Fog Blade and set that with Rusty's effect. So I'll go ahead and then say we activate Cloak to add ourselves our copy of Boots from deck to hand. And since we banished a monster, our Torn Scales can special summon itself right back. And so now we're still looking pretty solid. We can then special our copy of Boots from hand, since we have a Phantom Knight monster. We can overlay these two. For our Leviair the Sea Dragon, we can detach one, which I'm going to say is Torn Scales for the time being, so that way it doesn't go and get itself banished, to bring back our Ancient Cloak. We then can use our copy of Gloves that's in our graveyard to banish itself, to send a Fog Blade. So Fog Blade, now in grave, which we can then banish the copy of Fog Blade we just sent to bring back Torn Scales again. And here we have quite a few things we can do, which I think I see the most optimal play. If we didn't have to use Call By, we can keep that in the hand, which would be great. We can go ahead and activate our Shade Brigandine. Yeah, since we have no traps in the graveyard currently, since we used the Fog Blade already. So I'm going to move the graveyard over a little bit since we're not using anything in it at the moment. And I'll put Brigandine over here. So then we have a pretty loaded board. And so then we can make, using our Cherubini, the Shade Brigandine, and doesn't really matter what you use at this point. I'm just going to go ahead and use Leviair. Use these three to make, wrong card, the copy of Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess, and that's going to end up with 3 counters on it. So 2400, 3 counters, really not that bad. Then we can link these two away for Verte Anaconda. Then we can use Verte's effect. So there's that and that. And our Red Eyes Fusion. Shuffle it up again. So those will be in grave. We then get our copy of Dragoon. And if we don't have any cards in hand, so if we had to use the Called By, it's not the end of the world because we still have a copy of Boots in grave that we have not used yet. So we can banish our Boots, which will add us our last copy of Fog Blade from deck to hand. Since it doesn't automatically set it, we can have this waiting in our hand if we need to have a discard fodder for Dragoon. Or again, if we do have a card in hand, so if we didn't have to use the Called By the grave, we can just set the Fog Blade, and we end on a board with 3 negates with Appaloosa, 2 Fog Blade, and an Omni negate from Red Eyes Dragoon. And that's really, really strong. Again, that's assuming we didn't get hand trapped at all. Anyways, that's going to be the end of the video. If you want to see more test hands, more combo tutorials, leave a comment in the description below, and I'll see what we can do. Anyways, thanks for watching.